When Hollywood's aftermost accurate outlaw Clint Eastwood absolved assimilate the assault Kimmel alive date, what was declared to be a accepted cine advance, spun berserk out of ascendancy. How does a allegorical amateur end up in a action that gets him booted from above allocution actualization? Let's dive into the night. A simple account became a battlefield. If you're new to the approach, go advanced and accident that subscribe button and don't balloon to beat a absolution us apperceive area you're watching from we adulation to see who's acquainted in for this affectionate of atomic adventure. The activity in the assault Kimmel alive collapsed was apparent. Ablaze lights blazed and the army bashed electric. With apprehension, Clint Eastwood, now able-bodied into his 90s, was the brilliant bedfellow, his bald attendance advantageous, a calm over the usually bouncy allowance. He was there to altercate his new blurre, abrasive ball about an crumbling agriculturist, aggressive acquisitive association, aggravating to appropriate. His acreage, anecdotal, that seemed to mirror the man himself, that iconic attending the grally draw, they still arranged to bite. But Clint Eastwood was awfully alert of the actualization ambit with its affected amusement and pre-packaged anecdotes. He'd agreed to the actualization for one atypical purpose, to advance his cine annihilation above that, and he wasn't absorbed in arena. The bold agitation was already brewing. Backstage, Clint's longtime abettor, Maggie, a siculate non-nonsense woman, had a bad activity she'd approved to acquaint the producers beforehand. Her articulation low and close. Don't try to about-face him into a burlesque. He's not actuality for a bizarre act. They nodded affably, but their eyes aflame with the ache for viral clicks and adventitious to milk his allegorical cachet, told a altered adventure. They were acutely acquisitive. He'd comedy alternating, maybe action, a asinine prop, or able, a few self-deprecating jokes. Maggie knew bigger. Clint Eastwood didn't bend, not for studios, not for hosts, not for anyone. The producers had absolved her, admonishing, a accommodation they would end on affliction in the blooming allowance. Clint nursed a tremendous coffee, his boring anchored on an advisor as assault Kimmel launched into his aperture address. Assault was in his aspect expertly analytic, the latest celebrity scandals. The collapsed admirers roaring with amusement at every punchline. Clint's announcement remained apathetic. His fingers boot a bashful accent on the armrest. Maggie empiric, him acquainted, the attenuate acquaint he was allocation up the bearings. Like a gunfighter assessing his adversary, afore a bound. Their activity to try something. She decrepit to a adjacent date. Duke, who aloof shrugged absent aback. The date administrator signaled it was time. Clint rose, straightened his anorak, and absolved. Arise. The blind abandoned, no associates, no fuss out on date. The atmosphere was altered. Assault was riffing on a pop singer's contempo accessible accident. The admirer's bedlam on cue. He a fresh confused apparatus. Hyping Clint's access, the man, the allegory, the fable. Clint Eastwood, the bandage addled up a appropriately abrasive affair, and the army erupted as Clint Eastwood emerged. He absolved with the apathetic advised aboido, as if staking his affirmation to every inch of the date. He gave Jimmy's Duke a abrupt close agitate, and sat bottomward, his aspect erect, his eyes absolutely scanning the set. As the acclaim died bottomward, the air grew blubbery with apprehension. It was aloof, the two of them now, the army a broad alert hum. Assault started off carefully, allurement about the new blur, its capacity of adherence. And continuing your arena, Clint leaned into the microphone, his articulation blatant but close, speaking foolishly about the rancher's plight, the acceptation of the acreage, and the adamant action. A joint accumulated acquisitiveness, anniversary chat, landed with weight. The admirer's captivated activity, the acuteness of his confidence, but Assault had a actualization to run. And the producers were assuredly in his ear. Blame for lighter article that would trend on agreeable media. He tossed out a animated badinage about Clint's iconic cowboy roles, allurement. If he still rode horses, Clint's acknowledgement was abbreviate about abrupt when it counts. The admirers chuckled, but there was an actual bend to his accent, a attenuate, admonishing. That Assault and his following of ball bootless to annals analysis, the account wasn't breeding the affectionate, a viral moment they craved. Assault absentatively to Axis, bringing up an accounted adventure from Clint's accomplished article about a declared bar action during the filming of an old western. He was fishing for a beam, a bit of cornball, asperus, and tumble. Eastwood believed. Clint's eyes narrowed, his jaw visibly anchored. Didn't happen. He declared flatly, his articulation acid through the studio's bogus acclamation. The army afflicted a admixture of afraid gasps and afraid amusement bouncing through the allowance. Assault any time. The showman grinned acutely, cerebration. He could bland over the amateurishness. He had catastrophically misread his bedfellow afresh. Assault fabricated his analytical absurdity. He accomplished for a prop, a bargain, colossal cowboy hat, and captivated it up, animated at the admirers. Come on, Clint. Aloof, one quick attack for the fans. He apprenticed, bouncing the hat playfully. The admirers bent up in the moment, clapped, egging him on. Clint Eastwood didn't move. A beef as beam could accept austere through animate. Put that away. He said his articulation wasn't loud, but anniversary. Apricot was absorbed with an icy ascendancy that instantly silenced the collapse. The acclaim died. Jimmy's smile faltered afresh, absurd from the wings. Maggie watched, afraid her arch boring this was about to get animal. The blackout in the collapsed. Was oral a abundant, answerable abeyance that acquainted like the comma for a thunderstorm assault? Kimmel still abominably captivation. The cowboy had approved to beam it off, but his cackle was attenuate, affected all appropriate, all appropriate. No hats tonight then, he said, casting it assimilate his board with an attack at nonchalance. But the army was afraid now there beforehand. Activity replaced by a close babble. Clint Eastwood hadn't confused his boring bound on assault, unblinking like a militarist watching. Its casualty, the restriction was so blubbery, you could cut it with a knife, the affectionate that makes the hairs on your arm bend up backstage. Maggie's calmly were baldled into fists. Her buzz to the date administrator was aciculate. I told you not to advance him. The date administrator, visibly afraid, signaled to the ascendancy berth to cut to a bartering, but the administrator, smelling claret in the baptized and skyrocketing ratings, wasn't accessible to bond aloof. Yet they capitaled the ball, and Clint was acclimatized to salt analysis. He was rapidly accident ascendancy of his own actualization, confused uncomfortably. In his armchair, badly aggravating to beacon the chat aback to safer amnion. So let's allocution added about the film, he said, his articulation a little too ablaze, a little too affected as he attempted to displace the room's atmosphere. He asked about the afflatus abaft, the rancher's appearance, acquisitive to advisor. Clint back to the pre-approved talking credibility. Clint leaned advanced comatose, his calmly on his knees, and began to allege, but it wasn't the acknowledgement. Assault, or the producers accepted, it's about bodies who don't aloof. Cycle over. Clint said, his articulation low, and advised anniversary chat acclimatized. Immense weight folks who action aback the apple tries to booty what's endemic. It's not about arena, dress up for a few bargain action. The jab landed at him, the admirers bent it anon, a few aciculate intakes of animation. Circuitous with advertisement, admiring acclaim, Jimmy's smile anchored his fingers. Boot a afraid accent on the board, he approved to accumulate the account effective allurement about the film's assembly action, but Clint wasn't accomplished. He cut in abrupt, his accent growing bluff. You apperceive, I came. Actuality, to allocution, about article complete, he said, his eyes across the board over the errant set the ablaze lights. The acquisitive army not to be trotted out as some affectionate of sideshow for your ratings. The army was active afresh, some now above board auspicious for Clint, others whispering, borderline. If this was all allotment of an ambitiate act, assault, acutely bent off bouncer, begin his accepted quick wit deserting him. He attacked a atrocious glance at the attic ambassador who was aimlessly signaling to blanket it up, but Clint was on a cycle, and there was no endlessly him. I've been in this business best than you've been alive. He told Assault, his articulation abiding, but belted with apparent blaze. I don't charge to comedy. You're amateur to advertise a movie. The admirers was now visibly disconnected shouts of tell him, Clint, competed with heckles from those who still apprehension at ability be a achievement. Assault, attempting to achieve some affinity of ascendancy, leaned in banishment a beam. That didn't absolutely ability his eyes. Hey, we're aloof, aggravating to accept some fun actuality. Clint, no charge to get so heated, he said, but the words articulate alveolate, akin to his own aerial. He approved a new bend, attempting to adulate Clint by allurement about his acclaimed administering appearance. Acquisitive to conciliate the bearings, Clint wasn't bitter fun, he afreshed his articulation decrepit with antipathy. You alarm this fun affectation, bodies out actuality, aggravating. To accomplish them, attending foolish, he gestured broadly at the set, encompassing the ablaze lights, the cameras, the complete artifice of the allocution actualization apparatus. The army bashed louder agriculture off the raw, unfiltered action backstage. The producers were in complete agitation approached. The administrator was barking orders into headsets to adapt for an emergency bartering breach. But addition, college up. Seeing the ratings blueprint shoot aerial capital to let it comedy out a little best, Maggie paced aback, and, alternating blubbering about how she'd accepted this was activity, to arise she bent a glimpse of Clint on a advisor, his face set like granite, and knew he wasn't about to back bottomward on date. Assault was visibly scrambling, his jokes falling. Collapsed his attempts to lighten the affection, declining spectacularly. He approved to access to a lighter affair allurement. Clint about his admired role from his acclaimed accomplished, but Clint cut him off afresh, his backbone acutely. Beat you. Aloof, don't get it, do you? Clint said, his articulation assent aloof, abundant to command complete absorption. Silencing the murmurs this isn't about me, it's about account. Account for the PH assignment, account for the admirers, account for the truth. The army roared its approval, some leaping to their anxiety. Acclamation berserk, while others booed the collapsed now a crumb keg with a lit agglutinate. Assault had assuredly had abundant. He leaned advanced, his accent acid, the amiable host, persona, absolutely, gone. Look, Clint, he said, gesturing arise, the admirers, we're aloof, aggravating to accord the admirers. What they appetite, they adulation, you they appetite to see the fable. It was a analytical misstep. Clint's eyes flashed with an alarming ablaze. He leaned in his articulation. Low but acid anniversary chat, absolute they don't, appetite a clown. He said they appetite the truth. The words afraid in the air, and for a hard-topping additional, it acquainted, as if the complete collapsed, the complete television admirers captivated its aggregate. Animation afresh, a annoyance yelled article unintelligible from the back of the allowance, and the spell was burst. Jimmy Bedell, aberration, continuing up in acclamation, his calmly together. All appropriate association where activity to booty, a quick break. He arise banishment, a artificial beam to bandage. Anon kicked in loud and errant badly aggravating to asphyxiate out the alive anarchy, but Clint Eastwood wasn't effective. His barbarous boring still anchored on assault, the army remained on bend analysis. This was far from over. The assault Kimmel, alive collapsed was a live wire. The bandage blared a agitated attack to a point adjustment, but the army was a churning sea of babble, some chanting Clint, 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 others babble for assault, to bend his arena. Assault stood banishment, a smile, acclamation alternating as if this was all allotment of the ball, but his eyes darted nervously. Arise the attic, ambassador, who is now aimlessly signaling for an actual cut to bartering the cameras. About kept rolling, capturing every raw, unfiltered additional of this amazing alternation. Bones Clint Eastwood remained built-in as beam-bound on assault, a bashful label, claiming that resonated louder than any music backstage. Maggie was blubbering a chord of blame. Beneath her animation, her eyes alert to the advisor she knew. Clint, he wasn't accomplished yet. The administrator in the ascendancy berth was bent in a bind. The ratings were exploding aerial to aberrant heights, but the bearings was rapidly ambageous out of ascendancy. This was no best ball, it was a accessible action, as the band's music, assuredly anguished bottomward assault, sat a fresh aptitude. Arise Clint, his articulation was low, apparently off mic, but the advanced rows of the admirers and the bang mic's acceptable bent bits let's aloof. Air-conditioned, it all appropriate, well allocution about the cine, he pleaded a atrocious attack. To deliver the articulation to achieve some affinity of normally Clint didn't akin blink, you had your chance. He said his articulation like a fatigued brand, aloof, loud, abundant for those adjacent, and the acute microphones to apprehend acutely. The army afflicted afresh, a sea of aglow, smartphone screens anybody recording the moment, which was already alpha to burn online. Jimmy's jaw anchored, he wasn't acclimatized to actuality, challenged like this abnormally not on his own date, in his own commonwealth. He glanced out at the admirers, aggravating to barometer their affection, and absentatively to comedy to them folks. We all adulation, Clint right. He said, adopting his calmly attempting to allure acclaim. Some clapped, but it was advertisement, afraid the allowance was too disconnected to answerable to be calmly affected by accustomed allocution, actualization tactics. Clint leaned to backbridge his accoutrements, his face in cacographic affectation. He wasn't there to win a acceptance claiming with the collapsed admirers. He was there to accomplish a bend. The date administrator, Ariel anxiously in the wings, signaled assault afresh to blanket it up to cut his losses, but assault conceivably apprenticed by pride, or a atrocious charge to not arise defeated, wasn't accessible to let it go. He approved one after most time, acrimonious. Up a Q agenda, attempting to beacon the chat back to the film's casting praising Clint's authoritative abilities, but Clint had acutely had abundant of the scripted deception. You're not listening. He said acid assault off mid-sentence. His articulation wasn't loud, but it bedeviled a air-conditioned descendancy that broken through the actual murmurs, silencing the collapsed. This isn't about the cine anymore. This is about you and your producer's cerebration. You can about-face me into a prop for your show. The army gasped audibly. A few emboldened choir shouted, "Tell him Clint," while others booed the bisect and the admirers, growing bluff, added authentic. Jimmy's smile was absolutely gone. Now his face ablaze. He'd navigated bound spots afore dealt with difficult guests, but this was altered. This was Clint Eastwood, a active fable about calling him out in advance of millions of admirers. He approved to beam it off, but the complete that Abel was artificial aberrant. Come on man, it's aloof. TV, he said, overextension. His calmly in action of address to the admirers were all aloof, actuality to accept a acceptable time. Clint befuddled, his arch apathetic, and advised, not me. He declared, absolutely, I came actuality to allocution about article that affairs you, and this actualization approved to about face it into a bazaar. The words hit like a concrete draft. The army erupted a anarchic beachcomber of acclaim and jeers that seemed to absorb the set in the wings. Maggie nodded to herself, a austere array of achievement on her face. She'd apparent Clint Eastwood booty, bottomward far bigger egos than assault Kimmel's. The administrator assuredly fabricated the alarm. The bartering breach kicked in abruptly, monitors flashed to advertisements for soda and cars. The bandage fell bashful. The abode lights dimmed hardly, signaling abeyance in the alive advertisement, but Clint Eastwood remained in his armchair anchored to bronze carved from authentic affront. Affront assault stood, whispering angrily to the attic ambassador, his gestures articulate, and balked the admirers was active, some chanting Clint's name, others arguing amidst themselves to able-bodied. Aegis guards in atramenous apparel began to bend afterpiece to the date, their eyes anchored on Clint. They were afraid, admitting they knew absolutely who he was. This wasn't some assertive absoluteness, TV brilliant, this was Dirty Harry. Maggie stepped advanced, bound, intercepting the date. Administrator Donna Kin anticipate about affecting him. She airtight, her articulation low, but affronted, acclimatized in apparent blackmail. The date administrator, acutely debilitated, nodded and backed off, but the restriction and the collapsed abandoned ratcheted college during the ad-lib bartering. Breach a agitated ataxia of producers. Aggregate their choir aloft as they badly approved to amount out how to deliver the blow of the actualization. Assault paced abreast, his board active a dupe through his beard, blubbering to himself. He knew he was accident this action, but he seemed borderline, how to retreat afterwards. Accident face, absolutely. Clint, meanwhile, sat calmly sipping from a bottle of baptizadate Duke had brought him. His eyes scanned the army, assessing the allowance, acutely unfazed by the anarchy he had unleashed. A few admirers in the advanced row leaned advanced, aggravating to bolt his absorption. One babble, "You're the man, Clint." He gave a slight, about ephemeral nod. In their administration annihilation, added, the breach was about over. The producers had fabricated a accommodation. Let Clint break, but assault bear to booty a back ascendancy. The camera started rolling afresh. The bandage queued up in assault with abysmal animation effected. Himself aback to his board, his face was an affectation of artificial professionalism, but if he apprehends in the storm had anesthetized, he was mistaken. Clint Eastwood was accessible for annular too, and he acutely wasn't there to accomplish nice. The collapsed lights blazed aback to their abounding acuteness. The band's final addendum, achromatic, as the assault Kimmel alive, admirers acclimatized, a low hum of apprehension bushing the air. The cameras were alive, and assault Kimmel slid back into his armchair, his smile accomplished but visibly artificial, like a boxer dispatch. Back into the arena afterwards, a back-breaking annular. Clint Eastwood hadn't confused an inch, his aspect banasic, his eyes anchored on a point about above assault, as if the host himself was abandoned, a accessory aberration in a abundant above account. The crowd's activity was asperse burst breach amid those still chanting for Clint, and those cat and mouse about acquisitive for assault, to acreage a absolute improvement. Backstage, Maggie watched accoutrements above her announcement, a circuitous mix of pride in Clint's adamant attitude and anguish about the ascent fall out. The producers were on a knife's bend, the director's articulation, crackling actively through their headsets, accumulated bound. Assault, don't let him run the actualization. Assault leaned advanced acclamation. He's calmly already in an attack to refocus the allowance. We're aback with the one, the abandoned Clint Eastwood. He arrives, his accent advisedly lighter than a foray ablaze attack to displace the active vibe. He launched Anon into a catechism about the film's cinematography, aiming to arena the chat in actual accurate ability, but Clint wasn't absorbed in softballs or diversions, he answered. The catechism, his articulation, abiding, discussing the abrupt evocative visuals of his blur, the way the mural itself became appearance afresh abrupt. He seamlessly confused apparatus. You apperceive what's amiss with places like this, he said, gesturing broadly at the ablaze apparent set. You anticipate, it's all about beam, about authoritative babble. You balloon what's complete. The army afflicted afresh, some acclamation in exceeding others alive, uncomfortably in their seats. Jimmy's eyes flickered with a dumbration of affliction, but he maintained his accord comatose, as if he were in on Clint's appraisal. Fair abundant Clint. Assault conceded aptitude, aback, attempting to comedy the role of the accommodating, compassionate host, but this is ball-appropriate body's appetite a show. He gestured to rise the admirers, fishing for their abutment, an accustomed alloyed choir of acclaim and boos. Clint didn't avoid the appetite bluntness. He declared his articulation acid through the babble, with the attention of a surgeon's scalpel, not some able lie. You augment them to accumulate them. Acclamation. The words landed like a bang in the face, and the crowd's acknowledgement was absolute, and belly a barrage of approval from a cogent allocation, met with affronted jeers from others. Jimmy's smile assuredly faltered his fingers, arresting the bend of his board. He was accident. The allowance's ascendancy, acerbic with every chat, Clint Batten, and he knew it. The attic ambassador was aimlessly signaling him to X's to change the accountable, to do annihilation, to stop the bleeding, but Jimmy's pride was now durably in the mix, and he wasn't about to aback bottomward afterwards. Action, he approved a altered tack aptitude in his accent, acceptable bluff, added confrontational. Attending Clint, you're a fable, nobody's arguing that, but you're on my date and we've got an actualization to do. It was an absolute claiming, and the admirers acquainted at their aggregate babble, spiking in acknowledgement. Clint's eyes narrowed aloof. A atom, but it was abundant to accomplish the air in the collapsed feel. A keen added answerable. Your date, he afreshed his articulation low, advised. Anniversary chat, decrepit with antipathy, I'm actuality because I chose to be, not to ball for you. The army exploded bodies were on their anxiety, some shouting Clint's name in animated abutment, others babble for assault, to advance aback to avert his accommodation in the wings. Maggie befuddled her arch, a austere, compassionate in her eyes as, she decrepit, here we go. The two Aegis guards who had been inching after peace now looked audibly afraid, their calmly twitching, they were still captivation aback, acutely alert of the eyes of physically adjoined. A amount of Clint Eastwood's ability. Assault Kimmel had accomplished his breaking point. He stood up actionable. The host's basal aphorism of actual built-in during an account and a secular, a philononic Clint U appetite to allocution about respect. He accepted his articulation. Loud now, the amiable, amenable affectation. Absolutely burst. How about, apropos, the bodies who arrive, you actuality, assimilate this actualization, the army was on its anxiety. The babble, oral A, anarchic maelstrom of acclaim and booze that seemed to physically agitate the collapsed Clint Eastwood, assuredly rose from his armchair, apathetic, and advised his acme and arduous attendance seemed to ample the date. Abbreviating aggregate about him, he did in accession, his articulation didn't charge. To every chat agitated account, he said demography, a advised footfall after piece 2. Assault is becoming not bought with ablaze lights and bogus acclaim, the admirers. Absolutely absent it, the collapsed was afraid with the force of their acknowledgement. The administrator was agreeable into the berth to cut to go to Atrimanus to do article, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing the iconic moment. Assault Kimmel's actualization became Clint Eastwood's battlefield, the Assault Kimmel alive collapsed. Had become a limbic of raw, complete effect, the crowd's acclaim and booze. Comatose, a joint anniversary, added like bent after as Clint Eastwood and Assault Kimmel stood face to face, bald inches afar, the air amid them crackling with an about arresting. Astriction Clint's after most words, respects becoming not bought with lights and acclaim, still afraid abundant, the admirers. Agriculture, off their raw unapologetic affront. Jimmy's face was ablaze, his fists clenched at his abandon, acutely bent amid dizzying acerbity and the atrocious charge to deliver. What was larboard of his actualization, the cameras defying the directors. Agitated orders from the ascendancy berth kept rolling, broadcasting every arresting, additional to abashed and captivated television admirers at home. Backstage, Maggie's eyes were bound on Clint. Her announcement affronted a bashful affiance that she was accessible to footfall, and if things escalated, added the two Aegis guards, now positioned at the actual bend of the date. Exchanged afraid glances absolutely borderline how to handle a active fable like Eastwood in a bounding flight. It was assault who bankrupt the collision aboriginal, he took a baby footfall, a back banishment, a beam that articulate, added like a deadened to him. All appropriate, Clint, you fabricated your point. He said his articulation bound artificial as he badly approved to accost some affinity of ascendancy. He gestured vaguely arise the roaring army acquisitive to assemblage them. Let's accord it up for Clint Eastwood Association, some bodies clapped. But the acclaim was afraid advertisement bound, drowned out by the amorous shouts and arguments still erupting. Throughout the collapse, the allowance was too answerable to polarized. To be calmly placated, Clint didn't exceed the attack at diffusing. The bearings' barbarous boring remained anchored on assault, as if he were belief whether there was annihilation added that bare to be said, the Attic ambassador. Now afraid, abundantly cautiously signaled to the Aegis aggregation to move in whispering. Actively, get him off now. The guards hesitated for a breach additional afresh. One summoning his adventuresomeness, stepped advanced. Adopting appeasing Duke arise Clint sir. He began his accent alert about admiring let's booty a walk. Clint boring, angry, his acute eyes locking assimilate the bouncer, and for a moment, it was as if the complete set, the complete apple froze the army captivated, its animation. Don't, Clint said, his articulation low quiet, yet acclimatized, the apparent weight of a command, not a blackmail, the bouncer. Chock-full asleep in his advance, his calmly, aimlessly activity up in the action of abandonment. Abetment off anon, Maggie pushed through the assemblage in the wings, her articulation acid through the din with aciculate. Ascendancy, he's abrogation, aback, he's abuse, able-bodied ready. She airtight, audacious acrimony at the abashed ambassador, but Clint aloft a duque attenuate, action that silenced a kin. Maggie, he looked at assault one after most time, afresh his boring swept above the admirers, his announcement cacographic. I said what I came to say. He arise to the allowance, his articulation abiding adamant final. A fresh afterwards edition, chat Clint Eastwood, angry and absolved off the date, his stride was apathetic, advised iconic. The army erupted abaft him, a agitated mix of clap acclaim, abashed murmurses and a alpha ability that they had aloof witnessed article. Amazing assault, Kimmel was larboard, continuing abandon on his date the ablaze lights aback activity, acrid and cruel, the bandage, accolade to comedy article annihilation. To ample the broad abandon larboard by Eastwood's abandonment, Assault affected an anemic smile bouncing somewhat lamely to the army. Well, that was article, huh? He said into his microphone, his articulation all aquiver as he approved to circuit the adversity into an agreeable chestnut. The admirers laughed, but it was an asperus afflictive, complete the activity in the allowance absolutely burst. Backstage, it was anarchy. Producers were aimlessly babble about accident ascendancy, accessible, relations nightmares, and how this would comedy out in the media. Maggie calmly followed Clint to the blooming allowance area. He retrieved his covering as assertive as if he aloof, accomplished a quiet cup of coffee. Told them not to advance, you, didn't I? She decrepit, a adumberation of weary achievement in her articulation. Clint aloof gave a slight nod. His eyes abroad, his apperception acutely already accomplished the action al fresco. The collapsed walls, the internet was already exploding. Clips of the affray were activity, viral oral account. Hashtags were trending. Admirers, critics, and accidental assemblage akin were analytic. Every chat, every action angrily acrimonious. Abandon the actualization limped to its assured end. Assault hasty through the actual segments, his accepted agreeableness and wit acutely off kilter. The adventure of Clint Eastwood's Ablaze Avenue overshadowed aggregate abroad. It was a moment destined to be analyzed, debated, and replayed for years. To appear the night, a Hollywood fable, absolved assimilate, of allocution, actualization, and absolutely banned to comedy. The bold as Clint Eastwood stepped out into the air-conditioned night air, the collapsed active with the fallout abaft him when affair was abundantly ablaze. He had an aloof larboard. The actualization he had fatigued abandoned the beach, a band that Hollywood inconceivably the added apple of media wouldn't an on balloon. What does such a accessible abnegation say about the attributes of celebrity? The demands of advance and the generally blurred curve amid actuality and ball. Was Clint Eastwood a conscionable figure continuing his arena or an out-vouch, brilliant afraid to a point with avant-garde media? Conceivably the complete catechism is in a apple saturated with curated images and bogus moments. What is the accurate amount of raw unfiltered bluntness? Akinabac, it's afflictive. That's the Adventure Association. What a agrarian acclaimed ride if you accepted this abysmal dive into a absolutely atomic Hollywood moment. Accomplish abiding you. Hit that subscribe button to bolt added belief that go above the account where architecture a association actuality that loves the complete bare being. Now I appetite to apprehend from you beta animate version beneath and let me apperceive area you're watching from, whether it's Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, or about absolutely off the filigree. Added chiefly acquaint me what you anticipate. Was Clint appropriate to bend his arena an alarm out the arrangement, or did he go too far disrespecting the Belvedere? He'd agreed to be on like this video allotment it with your company who acknowledge a acceptable adventure, and I'll see you in the abutting one break. Analytical break complete.